for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, and still I rise. I rise, Madam Speaker, on behalf of Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution. I rise, Madam Speaker, on behalf of the more than 40% of people in this country who believe that an unfit president ought to be impeached. I rise on behalf of the many people who believe that somehow the voices of those who favor impeachment have been muted. And I want you to know, Madam Speaker, and to those who are listening, I want you to know that there is at least one person in the Congress of the United States of America who believes that an unfit president ought to be impeached. I rise on behalf of those, Madam Speaker, who believe that if President Barack Obama had behaved the way the current president has behaved, he would have been impeached. I rise to take a stand on behalf of the many who believe in impeachment of an unfit president. More than 40% of this country believes it. More than 80% thereabout of Democrats believe it. And I rise on behalf of the many people who understand that there is a humanitarian crisis at the border. The many people who believe that babies ought not be confined in small, confined places where they have to trip over each other if they want to traverse from one side of the room to the other. These are babies. I rise on behalf of these babies. And I rise on behalf of the many people who believe that if these babies were white babies, the response would be vastly different. We know that we would not tolerate what is happening in this humanitarian crisis if these were not people of color. We wouldn't tolerate it if they were white. We ought to treat all babies the same. We know that this president is a bigot, and we know that this policy at the border is rooted in bigotry. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I want you to know that this will not be my last time standing in the well of the Congress to deal with this issue. Let others do what they do. Take on the issues that you choose, but know that I believe an unfit president ought to be impeached, and we ought not have a double standard such that we treat people of color differently from the way we treat people not of color. And that's what's happening right now at this border. If they were coming in from the north and they were white, reaction wouldn't be the same. The fervor would be greater. The demand for justice would be greater. We have to take a stand against bigotry. We cannot allow it to continue to grow in this country. We are the place where the president is to be brought before the bar of justice. Only the House of Representatives can do it. And I declare this day that impeachment is not dead. I thank you for the time.
Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.